Hey, everybody, what's up? Welcome to the Most Excellent Entertainment Podcast. And like I said at the beginning of the year, doing things a little bit differently in 2025, and we had our first ever return guest. He is an author, a teacher, a wrestling historian, a movie producer, a jazz aficionado, just an all-around interesting guy, a fellow New Yorker, even though he's from the city and I'm from upstate. Please welcome, for the second time on the show, Mr. Evan Ginzburg. Evan, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. I'm flattered.
That's great having you back. Yeah. So, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading your book, because I'm on page 90 right now. I'm still getting through it. But I've had it about a week, so that tells you how quickly I read. But you talk about autographs and collecting, and one of my big things is when you get an autograph, the memory is more important almost than the signature. And now there's this whole thing where people are buying autographs and then reselling them, and it's like to me it seems disingenuous. And I was just wondering how you feel about that as a collector of autographs, like what the shift is and that sort of thing.
I think it's absolutely reprehensible that millionaires, celebrities, and wrestlers, ironically, are selling their autographs for top dollar when a Hulk Hogan is demanding $425 for an autograph. You know, I come from an era where you would stand outside the stage door at Madison Square Garden and 90% of the wrestlers would readily shake your hand, sign autographs, take pictures with you. And, you know, now it's become absolutely mercenary. Recently, The Undertaker did an appearance and they were charging $2,873 to do a toast with him, you know, because 3,000 would have been greedy. You know?
Yeah.
You know? So, I mean, it reaches a point where, you know, I'm not saying to stalk these guys at airports or hotels 3 in the morning, but if you're paying good money to see a show and you walk up to a celebrity and say, "Can I have your autograph?" You know, throughout history, the vast majority would say yes.
Right.
And back in the 80s, when I was much, much younger, you can do the math, um, I was an avid autograph collector and I would go down to NBC Studios in Manhattan and they taped Live at Five, which was a news show, and David Letterman's show out at NBC. That's how long ago this was.
Right.
And there'd be 6, 7 celebrities a day, and the vast amount of them would sign. Interestingly, in the book, I write about Ringo Starr. This is in the 80s. He goes, "You know what happened to one of us the last time we stopped?" And he wouldn't sign, which I understood. But ironically, Yoko Ono stood and signed for everybody. So you would have thought she'd have been shell shocked, and you know, it's a crowd of people clamoring for your autographs. So it's interesting. Michael Jackson one day, there were a grand total of 5 collectors out there, and there was this whole elaborate thing where he didn't go out the regular door. He fled out the other door and literally leaped into a limo. There were 5 people. He could have signed for 30 seconds and it would have, you know, so there's a little paranoia with some of these guys. But when all is said and done, you know, it was a really good experience. As a kid, the first time I went to Broadway, this is going to date me, but Patrick McNee from the Avengers, you know, John Steed. You know, this was a huge, huge show here, and he's on Broadway in a play called Sleuth. So I'm a kid, and I'm with my parents, and we're waiting at the stage door, and he comes out like British royalty, you know, and you know, I asked for an autograph, and he pats me on the head. I felt like I was knighted, you know, and uh, and it was a great experience. And subsequently, you know, I would go to Broadway shows and stand by the door. And again, the vast amount of stars were quite nice. So I find the shift, getting back to your initial question,
Yeah.
where celebrities will say, I will no longer do this, no longer, approach me. You are infringing on my time. I'm like, well, if you're making millions of dollars and you're a primetime celebrity, this is one of the things that comes with it. It's not just selling your autograph at top dollar to fans at a wildly overpriced WWE event or whatnot. It goes both ways. We're paying your salary. And again, don't stalk these guys and don't be rude and don't harass them. But, sir, could I have one autograph? Is not to me some kind of crime. And they're shifting it to, you're stalking us, you're infringing on my free space or whatnot.
Right, right. I remember the Kiss conventions. Um, I feel like Kiss was one of the first entities to start charging like Paul and Gene outrageous amounts of money just to shake their hand. If you wanted an autograph, it was even more than that, and I feel like it kind of grew from there. And it's just
Let me
been
just say this. For a mid-level musician, an indie
yeah,
musician, whatever the genre is, it doesn't matter. Everybody's downloading their stuff for free. I could see a mid-level musician who legitimately gives you some time and chats with you, and it's a warm, friendly thing. Yeah, I could see that VIP pass or whatnot. But when you're a millionaire rock star, like Kiss, you don't need to, be vacuuming your fans' pockets.
yeah,
Honestly.
for sure. Um, so you mentioned the NBC studios and whatnot. One of the things that I noticed going through your book is, and I'm not even like I said a third of the way done yet, but you've experienced some really historic events. You were there for Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler, and you were there for and you gave a much different perspective from a live setting than what was presented. Like I remember, I was young, but I remember when that happened, and the perception that they gave nationally was definitely very different than what you saw at the NBC studios. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because that's
Sure,
really
sure.
interesting.
Again, there's 100 stories. It's called Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. And one of the stories is I'm at NBC Studios for the legendary Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler confrontation. And, this is a hip New York crowd. This isn't. So Kaufman comes out, and the vast amount of people in the audience are like, he's doing shtick. This is funny. This isn't a wrestling crowd. This is a talk show in New
Yeah,
York, in Manhattan. Okay, and Letterman had a hip young audience at the time. So Kaufman's doing his shtick, and Lawler kind of came off as a bully because these weren't wrestling fans, acknowledging Lawler's the face and Kaufman's the heel. This is like Kaufman's a comedian, and this is like he's out of his mind, and it's outrageous, and this is great. So the fans were kind of turning on Lawler. You could feel that vibe, and at one point he actually acknowledges it. He says, "You don't." I forget exactly the words. This is 40
yeah,
plus years ago. He said something like, "You don't understand. He attacked me in Memphis." It was some, but Lawler wasn't getting the reaction he wanted. And finally, Kaufman really turned it up a notch because maybe he realized he wasn't getting what he wanted from the wrestling point of view. So now Kaufman is literally cursing and screaming. And then Lawler hit him. And, the rest is history. But it was wild being there. And I was so thrilled to have seen Kaufman live. And also, people totally forget this. On Broadway, there was a play called Teaneck Tansy and the Venus Flytrap, and it was about pro wrestling. And it was Kaufman and Debbie Harry. Debbie Harry, at the peak of her fame.
sure.
And I saw it, and it closed opening night on Broadway. So technically, I saw Kaufman live twice, and none
Nice.
of it was doing a stand-up. So it's interesting what I saw him in. But
Yeah.
I'm a fan of stand-up, and I have a piece in the book on Richard Pryor also. But
Yes.
I was just thrilled to have seen Kaufman, and he was a genius. He was ahead of his time, and I mean, just to be there live to witness him, it was special. It really was special.
Yeah, definitely. There was in the 80s, stand-up comedy was so huge.
Oh yeah.
I feel like it's kind of making a comeback now, but it's in a different way. Like we would sit down and I watched Raw and I watched Delirious probably a million times, and I would pour over Bill Cosby's records, and I would stay up late to watch Evening at the Improv and just
Oh, yeah. Me
follow these comedians, you know. And now it's all about a viral clip and like a 10-second, you know. But I think that, and Stephen Wright. I mean, I don't know. I'm just popping stuff off the top of my head, but I think that that the intimacy of the 80s and like just getting to know these comics and their routines and laughing at their jokes and stuff was special, you know.
was a different world because back then you did a bit on Carson and you were a star overnight. People were
Yeah,
recognizing you in supermarkets or wherever the very next day.
right.
And now you have thousands and thousands of channels, so you don't have that everybody's watching the same thing at the same time kind of
Mm-hmm.
ratings. And yeah, comedy was white hot in the 80s, and all these guys were coming up. And um, I have a piece in the book on Pryor, and this was already a bit later. He was sick, and it was in the 90s. And as you said, we would go see Pryor in movie theaters, 2 hour filmed
Mm-hmm.
concert, films of his live
Yeah,
stand-up with packed, roaring audiences at the movie theaters. So now shoot ahead maybe 10 years, and he's not what he was. He was physically very ill. And he walks into the Westbury Music Fair, which is a theater in the round. It still exists. And he's struggling to walk down the aisle and he sits down. It's stand up. He's sitting down. He has giant cue
yeah,
cards in front of him. And this is not the Richard Pryor we had known a decade earlier. He does a sad 45-minute set. He's a shell of what he was. But here's the interesting part of the story. As it wraps up, it's a spontaneous standing ovation, not for that show, but for who he was. And he's laboring back to the dressing room, and he's actually being helped. And everybody's reaching out to touch him, to touch his shoulder, to touch his back, because he was like the god of comedy. Lenny Bruce, Richard
mm-hmm.
Pryor, George Carlin, Robert Klein. This is like the Mount Rushmore, arguably, of course, but that
Yeah.
you could say Cosby, but Cosby's like Chris Benoit. You're not supposed to
Like, so
tell
really talking about him
anything
anymore.
positive about Cosby. So,
Yeah,
Cosby was a
unfortunately.
great stand-up. You can't take that away from him. But
Right, right.
but anyway,
Except for a clean comic in the 80s. There weren't a ton of clean comics in the 80s. So,
anyway, he was downright funny. I
yeah,
mean,
he was.
I'm
Yeah,
talking the TV show. I'm talking the stand-up.
yeah,
Um, so So it was a painful moment as Pryor made his way back, but it was a beautiful moment because we all knew we're not going to see him again. It's over. It's
yeah.
over. No. And yeah, so I'm a huge fan of I have friends who are stand-ups. It is not easy. Check
Yeah,
parties to me as a kid.
yeah, still a kid. Yeah, I get you.
But brilliant, brilliant comedian. And this he did a one-man show during COVID alone in his room, and it was
Oh, wow.
funny. Yeah,
Nice,
yeah. Nico,
nice.
White, seriously.
Okay. I'll check them out. Yeah, like with me, whenever I come across a comedian who seems funny, I always go and watch their whole deal. Like I'm not gonna judge someone on one joke or one crowd interaction. Like I need to see that they can like even the people who went out on Letterman or Carson, did 3 to 5 jokes. They didn't just come out with one joke. Like you can't judge somebody off one joke. But
And people have a
um,
bad night, or
sure,
what's not the right crowd. You say today, let me tell you, my stand-up friends, they're like, we're nervous to play colleges.
mhm,
You're gonna offend somebody with something, and
right,
it's not an easy gig anymore. And now it's all shifted to like Netflix, not just viral videos. You get your 1 hour special on Netflix, and
yep,
can
yep.
you hold an audience for an hour? It's not easy.
I always say that if your joke isn't offending someone, it's probably not funny.
Yeah, the world doesn't need another airplane joke. I mean, you have to have
Yeah,
some edge to it, and sometimes it's just too vanilla and too safe. But I'm a fan of comedy. I mean,
yeah,
to this day, I'll watch a stand-up, on Netflix, and but I'll tell you what's interesting is the more political some of these guys get, the less funny they get.
yeah,
I don't think Dave Chappelle's anywhere near as funny as he was back when he was doing his
yeah.
show.
I
You
agree.
know,
I
I mean,
agree.
it's always worth watching him. He's an intelligent, well-spoken, funny guy, but he's not as funny.
Yeah, he's definitely not. Um, so shifting a little bit to the book, I expected there to be stories about celebrities and the people that you've met through wrestling and movies and stuff like that. What I didn't expect was how personal the book gets. You talk about friends that you've lost. You talk about the loss of your father and what a hero he was growing up to you and your mother's struggle with mental health. How hard was it to put that stuff into the book, or was this something that you always planned on doing when you wrote it, or how did that come out?
Um, I was sitting here during COVID, and when I say sitting here, literally sitting here, because I'm in Queens, New York, which, with the exception of China, was the epicenter. LaGuardia, Kennedy airports, immigrant communities. I got a call from my boss as a teacher. We're shutting down. We're shutting down. Then I go to the gym. We're shutting down. Then I go to the diner I always ate at. We're closing down. We can't afford to make it just on takeout. And the the movie theater was shutting down. I'm a movie buff. I make movies. The world just felt smaller and smaller. I felt like I was wearing an ankle bracelet, like I was under house arrest. You'd make your way out to the supermarket in a mask, and so it was a brutal stretch. I had 5 friends die of COVID, 5. And when I tell that story, I've had adult students, I teach English as a second language. I've had adult students tell me I lost 10 relatives in India. 10 relatives. So there's always somebody that has it worse.
Sure.
But for me to stay sane, instead of getting up and going to the gym, instead of doing what I would ordinarily do, I sat down and wrote. And I
Yeah.
found that a lot of these stories, and some of it's funny, some of it's tragic. It's a mix of everything. Some of these were weighing on me for decades. And I finally, every day, I wrote one story and then I edited it and honed it and, worked on it until I felt they were ready, put it in a chronology that made sense by decade. So basically, it's 100+ stories that tell my life as a teacher, as a person involved in pro wrestling. I was an agent. I've done play-by-play. I've done heel managing. I've done a little of everything except
Right.
actually wrestle. I'm not a
Right.
trained wrestler. Publicist. I've been a publicist for wrestling conventions and such. And from all of that, I ended up being the associate producer and acted in The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. I was basically their wrestling guy. I brought in Mickey's stunt double, the ring, his trainer. I did a half dozen or so casting calls. I didn't write the script, but I helped with the script as far as making the wrestling ring true. And it was one of the great experiences of my life. And we chronicle that later in the book. You're
Yeah, I'm
not
not
up to
there
that
yet.
yet. Yeah, yeah. The making of the wrestler. And it was a wild ride, boy. We had the other day when Sean Baker kept winning the Academy Award for Andorra, and it's a great film. I love Sean Baker and I love
Yeah,
Andorra. He said it was interesting. He said we did this on $6 million, and that's exactly what we did the wrestler on, $6 million,
yeah,
which today would be like the food budget on the Avengers. You know,
sure,
I mean,
sure,
it's not.
sure.
It's an indie film. It's a low
Yeah,
budget indie film, and
yeah,
it was like guerrilla filmmaking, boy. We were using the wrestling fans as the extras because we didn't have the money for a ton of extras. And some of them were not happy we were there. We were interrupting their wrestling
sure.
show. So at one event, Ring of
Yep.
Honor, one event, Darren Aronofsky gets on the mic because the fans are giving us a hard time. They're booing. They just want to watch the
Right.
wrestling. So Aronofsky gets on the mic and he goes, guys, I promise you, we'll make you proud with this film. Just let me get one or two more quick takes. And to Darren's
Yeah.
credit, and he's a good guy. He's a good guy. His mom was a New York City school teacher. He's not a rich kid. He got by on talent and drive and originality. This guy's not some rich kid with a million connections. He's the real deal. For 6 months leading up to the filming of The Wrestler, I took them on the road to wrestling conventions, to wrestling, events, to Johnny Valiant's comedy show, anything and everything wrestling,
Yeah.
because Darren wanted it to ring true. And we sat in dressing rooms and he picked Nikolai Volkov's brain and King Kong Bundy's brain and Johnny Valiant, etc., so on. And it's interesting. I'm a big fan of Jim Cornette. The Midnight Express is my all-time favorite tag team.
Yeah.
But Cornette publicly he said he was critical of the wrestler because he goes, "We don't all end up in trailer parks." Absolutely true. Nikolai had a
Yeah.
farm. You know, we did a documentary, 350 Days, with Bret Hart. He ended
Hmm.
up well, except for them killing
Right.
his brother.
Right.
But dollars and cents, he ended up
Yeah.
well. So, but Darren Aronofsky, every film he makes leans dark.
Yeah.
He doesn't do rom-coms. This is a
Right.
different guy. So
Right.
he's going to tell the story of the guy that did end up in the trailer park, that the guy that did not end up well, did not
Right.
end up healthy, did not end up financially with anything. That's what he wanted to make, and that story rang true.
Yeah.
There are a
And
million wrestlers today. That's
yeah.
a different story.
Yeah. And I mean, I would think from the 80s at least, because this seems like it was an 80s guy
Oh yeah.
trying to make it through the more modern times in wrestling. You have Tony Atlas and Jake Roberts as the biggest examples of two guys who were top guys. I mean, Tony Atlas ended up living in a shack, like a literal shack, and everybody kind of knows about Jake Roberts' fall. So I mean, the stories are there. That stuff did happen. So, and those guys were on top of the world at one point. So
Yeah, and let me throw this in because people really don't understand. I was on the road as an agent with legends, and I heard the stories, the numbers, the rip-offs. Okay, let's say you're a top star, mid 80s. You're making 400 grand. Let's
right,
say a Nikolai Volkov. You're main eventing, co-feature, whatever the case may be. Okay, good money, but they worked over 300 days a year. Do the math. Okay,
right,
you're headlining major arenas,
yeah,
and it's not a windfall. You're on the road, 3 meals a day, gas, tolls,
yeah,
and health insurance, taxes. You're sending money back to your family, wherever that may be. Okay. So, you know, it's
yeah,
it's not it's not a windfall. So when people do and before that Hulkamania rock and wrestling mid 80s era, none
Yeah.
of these guys, with the exception of a Dusty Rhodes or an Andre the Giant or the world champions,
Right.
none of these guys broke 100 grand. Johnny
Yep.
Valiant, the Valiant brothers were the number one tag team in the world. Johnny said to me, I never broke 100 grand in wrestling. So when the fans do the quote, they all pissed away fortunes on wine, women, and song. No, because they all didn't make fortunes to begin with. They all didn't piss it away. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, stories. Some, partied hard and blew their money. Others, Nikolai saved his money. Lanny
Yep.
Poffo was a dear friend. He saved his money. So you
Right.
can't make these blanket statements and blame the victim. How about they didn't get paid what they should have in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as a kid, I would watch Memphis wrestling on FNN Score of all things. And I thought those guys were huge stars. They're in magazines, they're on TV, and then when you find out later what the payoffs were in Memphis, like guys were making $20, $25.
Notoriously bad Memphis.
Yeah. Yeah. And people don't get that. You just don't understand that because you grew up watching these people as larger than life, but they were really, you know, all having to have second jobs and barely struggle, barely getting by unless they were Jerry Jarrett and Jeff or Jerry Lawler. I mean, like everybody else was. It's trickle down and it trickled down very quickly. So there's the wrestler was true. Regardless of how some people want to look at it, that definitely happened to people
Oh, yeah.
for sure.
There are guys who headlined Madison Square Garden when their careers were over. They were pushing a broom. They were working a door as a bouncer at a strip club or rock club or whatever the case may be. You know,
Sure.
it's not as glamorous as people think. And as an agent, I would go to conventions literally around the world, and you'd see the same
Yeah.
faces. There's Virgil, there's Tammy Sitch, Sonny, there's Ox Baker, etc., so on. And they weren't there because they
Sure.
were rolling in the money. They were there because they needed the money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would assume, unless you have like a huge connection with your fans and you just want to meet them, if you've got enough money, you're going to take the Kevin Nash route and stay home. I mean, generally speaking. And you can kind of like a few months ago, the singer for 24/7 Spies was mugged and died. And he was working at like a dispatch center or something like that. And 24/7 Spies were a touring band. They toured the
I
world.
saw them.
You know,
Funk, hip hop,
yeah.
rock. It was like, I've seen them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're one of my favorite bands
Great,
as a kid, and I
great.
was just like, "Wow, he's working as a dispatcher, like at a bus terminal. Like that's
Hey,
crazy
one
to
of the
me, you
greatest
know." And
bands in the world, Fishbone. Don't think these guys are rolling in
sure,
cash. I mean, but they're one of the best bands in
yeah,
the world.
yeah, absolutely. I loved Fishbone as
They're
a
still
kid.
out there. They're still.
Yeah, yeah, I love that fusion stuff. Like anybody who can take like blues or funk or jazz and combine it with rock, the chances are I'm gonna like it.
Speaking
So
speaking of a fusion, Roy Ayers died yesterday. That guy was
I know I saw,
brilliant,
man.
brilliant music. I'll tell you a Roy Ayers story. I'm at Summer
Sure.
Stage, Central Park, and this is a true story.
Okay.
I'm not elaborate. I'm not exaggerating. So it's a
Yeah.
rainy, drizzly, overcast day, and just
Yeah.
as he starts to perform, "Everybody Loves the Sunshine," his biggest hit, the sun comes out.
Uh,
The sun came out,
that's
and
awesome.
like the place popped for the sun. It was like Roy had
Yeah.
mystical powers. He brought the sun out with his music. Yeah, yeah, that
That's
really
awesome.
happened. Yep.
That's so cool. My introduction to Roy Ayers was speaking of fusion stuff, Guru
Yeah.
put out a couple of jazz albums.
Razzmatazz.
And
Yeah, yeah, Guru.
Roy Ayers was on the first. Roy Ayers was on the first one. There's actually a line where he says, "My man Roy, he brought the vibes along," and then he plays some piano, and it's just like, man,
See,
that was my
you're
introduction.
50. I'm older than you. And
Yeah.
I hate to hear these old white guys do rap isn't music, it's
Oh,
just
it's so,
noise. Let me tell you something.
yeah.
Rakim just played Carnegie Hall with an orchestra. De La
Right.
Soul just played Lincoln Center with an orchestra. So how
Right.
is it not music? Please,
Yeah. Yeah.
please.
And I mean, uh, Questlove is one of the greatest drummers alive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are um, the Fun Loving Criminals. They were like a Italian rap group from New York City.
Yeah.
They got really popular in Europe and kind of left the city and went over to France and whatnot. But I was listening to them at my house, and I'm going to quote a buddy of mine. So anybody who has sensitive ears, forgive me. Um, but I was listening to the Fun Loving Criminals, and my buddy comes in and he said, "Oh man, Italian rap cats." And I said, "Well, I don't know if you call them rap because they play their instruments." My friend looks at me, he's a black dude, looks at me, he looks at me and he says, "Motherfucker, have you heard of the Roots?"
Yeah.
And I was just like, well, yeah. I mean,
Every time I saw Public Enemy live, they had a full band on stage.
sure, sure. And Stetsasonic had a drummer, in the early 80s. Like, so yeah, I mean, for someone to say there is a creativity to rap music, and it's music, regardless of what people think. Like, it's
You
all,
know,
you know,
if people really understand music, really, it's all roots of the same tree. You mentioned the roots.
yeah,
It's roots.
yeah,
Hip
yeah,
hop is R&B's cousin. R&B's
right.
cousin. And the DNA of hip hop is really James Brown, George Clinton, and Roger Troutman. Roger Troutman from
Absolutely.
Zapp. So you
Yeah,
can't say it's not music when you have this great music going through it. I mean,
right.
it's
I,
it's just narrow-minded. The people that do
yeah,
there's been no good music since the Beatles. Just shut up. That's just stupid.
yeah. It's dumb. Good music coming out every day. You just have to look for it,
And there's great indie musicians,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
they're too lazy to seek them out.
Yep.
It's easier to pull out the same dozen records you played in high school or college.
Right. I just picked up this live album. It's actually not going to be released until later on this month, but I backed a Kickstarter, so I got it early by this band called Sergeant Thunderhoof, and it sounds so silly, but it's like this jazzy doom metal. It's so good. Like it reminds me of Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, and like it's so raw, and there's it's really. I think you could find good emotion in any kind of music. You just have to find the right artists.
A
And
couple weeks ago, I saw Sonny Jane, and he's Indian American, but
sure.
his parents are Indian, and his roots are in Indian music. But it's a fusion of Indian music, rock, rap, spaghetti westerns. He mixes in spaghetti western
Awesome.
riff, Ennio
Yeah.
Morricone. And I'm sitting there and I'm jaded, man. I'm like, these guys are great, you know.
Right. 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 Right.
And this guy should be playing arenas. He's playing a little college campus gig.
Yeah.
Tremendous artist, and
Yeah.
blew me away. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen G Love in the Special Sauce 5 times.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
saw him
I
last year.
saw him live. Good musician. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I saw him on a 30th anniversary of the first album where they played the whole album last year. And man, at 51, he's better than the first time I saw him. Like he just blows me away. Like how like his energy was higher than it was when I saw him back in the 90s. It's just yeah, people just have to look, man. There's great music out there everywhere.
It can't just be what you listened to 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You're limiting, you're cheating yourself actually. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to get into a story in the book, but I also just want to say real quick, like I have a hip hop tribute album to Roger Troutman called "Still More Bounce." It's really
Really?
good. Yeah, it's really good. Um,
I
I
got a
enjoy.
Roger Troutman story in the book.
Yes, that's what I was. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's where I was going.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so if you want to tell about it, yeah, that's awesome. Like your friend took the picture and everything. It's a cool story.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Roger Troutman and Zapp were this funk band out of Ohio. And
Yeah,
Zapp is still around. Uh,
right.
So I go to see them at the World Trade Center. People forget that they had concerts daily during the summer. You
Yeah.
know, great artists. I saw Isaac Hayes there, Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley. I mean, they have world-class artists playing there
Yeah.
for free. So I go to see Roger Troutman and Zapp, and he just blew the place away. I shouldn't even. That's the wrong term for the World Trade
Yeah.
Center. But he was great. He was great, and I wait to get him to sign some stuff. You know, I had some albums, and he comes out friendly, gracious, warm. And I had a picture that my friend Mike Einhorn took at the Roxy in LA where we saw Roger Troutman and Zapp. And so I show him the picture and he's like, wow, that's a beautiful
Yeah.
picture because my friend placed in a photo contest with it. That's how nice the photo was.
Right.
So to make a long story short, he signs it and I walked out of there. I felt like I was walking on air. It was just such a great show and he was so great. And it never dawned on me. It was a perfect day, beautiful weather, warm, sunny. It never dawned on me that they would blow that place up and and he was murdered by his brother. They got into an argument, and when the brother realized what he had done, 4 minutes later, the brother killed himself. If anybody had told me that day that this guy with this happy, joyful music, joyful noise, if you will,
Yeah.
was going to get killed and they were going to blow the place up, the World Trade Center, I would have said you're freaking nuts. You know,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So the irony of the story is I named it A Perfect Day because that's what it was. And
Yeah.
you had no idea, the future that they would all have.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah.
tragic, utterly tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I don't know. I think that especially some of the stuff that was on well, not even just on those albums, but I think Roger Troutman had a pretty big influence on Prince. They were contemporaries, but I think that Prince paid attention to the stuff that Roger Troutman was doing because he incorporated a lot of that Zap Tube stuff into his music, and Roger was really the pioneer of that.
And a great showman. What a
With
tight
the
show.
outfits and yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I saw James Brown many times, Prime Al Green, P-Funk, Kid Creole and the Coconuts, show bands.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and since we're talking music, I learned something a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
So George Clinton is doing an interview, and he says that the riff from Flashlight
Mhm.
came from a bar mitzvah song. When he was a kid, he goes at
That's
the
your,
bar mitzvah,
yeah.
and it's stuck in his brain. 40
Oh,
years
that's
later,
wild.
he writes Flashlight, and it's this massive hit. You know,
Right, right, right.
so again, all music notes have no color.
Yeah, for sure.
Cab Calloway borrowed from cantors, Jewish cantors.
Mhm.
Okay. You always hear the white culture bandit, down south in Memphis, all
Yeah,
the music meshed. The
yep,
musicians were black and white, you know,
right.
country and R&B and gospel and blues, it all meshed. You see, the
Yeah,
average person doesn't really know or understand music.
right,
Make
right.
these generalizations. And for many years, I was writing concert reviews for an R&B publication.
Oh, cool.
After like the 37th evil Jewish record company owner, I'm Jewish. I got a little tired of it. I said,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
never address like the young white and Jewish, kids that start these little labels that love and worship R&B and and bring some of these guys back out on the road. You don't address that. I mean, there's two sides to every story. Sure, there were plenty of thieves in the music business. Some were Jewish, some were other ethnicities, you know,
Right, right, sure, yeah.
but
I,
you can't just tell one side of a story. That's not journalism.
right. I think that when people look back, regardless of what you think about his lifestyle at this point, retroactively, I think that when people look back at Elvis Presley, that's one of the things that they don't understand. He was a poor white kid in a black neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee, who used to sneak out to go to black churches. And that's where he learned an appreciation for that music. And he always, in his interviews, acknowledged the artists that came before him and where he got his inspiration from. And now, since Public Enemy, people are just like, oh, he stole black music. But it's first of all, it's what he grew up around, and second of all, he was honoring black music. At least I'm sure. That's how I always took it. And
When
it's
when when Chuck D goes, Elvis was a hero to most, but he
yeah,
never meant to me. He was
yeah,
racist? No,
yeah,
no, 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 no.
yeah,
He was not racist. He
right,
he was good friends with James Brown. He
yep,
loved gospel. He loved R&B. He
yep,
acknowledged these guys,
yep.
and
Little Richard, Chuck Berry, like he was.
I understand, there's an extensive interview with Ray Charles on YouTube where he goes, Elvis was just doing what we were doing, but because he was white and good looking, he got the push and he made the crazy money that a lot of us didn't. I
Yeah,
understand that, but
absolutely.
but don't say the guy's racist if he's not racist. That's just not
Right,
fair. And
right.
I'm not like a huge Elvis fan by any means. I'm just saying it's
Sure.
not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Little Richard, said that if it wasn't for Elvis, he wouldn't have sold the records that he sold. He acknowledged that.
Little Richard didn't even have bad blood towards Pat Boone. He said because it filtered back to him where he
Yeah,
made money. So
yeah,
it's complicated. It's all very complicated, but you can't always spin everybody's a racist. 'Cause,
right, for sure.
sometimes it's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the heart of it, I mean, like you were talking, music all comes from the same place at the heart of it. You know, uh, it's all R&B and blues and jazz and then everyone builds on that, and turns it into
Watch
whatever they turn it into.
Watch documentaries like Standing in the Shadows of Motown, and you'll see how close the black and white musicians were, and they loved each other and supported each other. They weren't seeing color.
It's
It's
the
the
audience.
guys, spinning all of this.
Right, for sure, for sure. And a lot of that now is it's retroactive and it's people looking back on things with a different eye, but um so
Yeah,
let's
catch you off topic. Yeah.
yeah, this was, I mean, that's what happens on this show. We just kind of talk and
I'll
things
tell
go.
you honestly, I talk so much about wrestling. It's refreshing to talk about something else. I,
Absolutely.
I get I get a little bored with the guys who only know wrestling.
Yeah.
They know every title, every date. I'm like, there's more to life. There's more
Sure.
to life.
Well, and I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing about your book. Like, wrestling is in there, but wrestling is just a part of your story. Like, you've done so much. And I know, like, when I've seen you post a lot about your love of jazz on Facebook, and we like some of the same jazz musicians, and it's just, I definitely wanted to talk to you about the music side of things after reading what I have of your book, because man, you got to see so many great musicians. It's just amazing. Like, that's one of the things that I kind of regret about. I don't think I've seen anyone on a legend level. Like, I just haven't. I've seen a lot of great indie musicians and musicians who are on their way up and musicians coming back down, but I don't think, I never saw Sarah Vaughan. I
I
mean, that's
met I
just
met
that,
Sarah Vaughan. She was super nice. Sarah Vaughan would go from high to low, unbelievable octave range, and
yeah.
she was unbelievable. It's interesting. In the book, I tell a story. my dad took me to see Eddie Jefferson, who 999 out of 1,000 people wouldn't know, but he was one of the heroes
Right.
of vocalese, Manhattan Transfer,
Yeah.
and all these acts, took a lot from
Okay.
him and also Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, who were unbelievable. And so my dad takes me to see Eddie Jefferson at an outdoor free show, Jazzmobile. And I'm a kid. I'm 13, 14. And they had taken me to jazz before, but it was like my ears weren't quite ready. Like I'm watching Mel
Right.
Torme and I don't quite get it. I'm watching Ella Fitzgerald, I don't quite get it. But Eddie Jefferson was so dynamic and colorful and a showman. It's like my ears open. Like, wow. It's like it was like an epiphany. Like, yeah, this is jazz. I get it. I get it. And after that, I go see all the same people, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, and suddenly, I was like, wow. And
Yeah.
yeah, I saw some of the greatest. I'll tell you what's funny. I started going to jazz in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of the legends were still alive. So I saw and met
Right.
Big Joe Turner. I saw and met Johnny Otis. I saw and met Cab Calloway. You know, the people I saw, I saw and met Fela Kuti. I mean, that
Yeah. Yeah.
thrill.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
thrill. And I mean, some of the shows I've seen, the greatest show I ever saw with wrestling, I go Flash Steamboat Meadowlands, greatest match I ever saw.
Wow. Wow.
With with
Wow.
with music, 1975, Al Green, New York.
Mm,
He whipped the women into such a frenzy, they stormed the stage past security and they enveloped him on the stage. You couldn't see him anymore. He,
man.
I mean, it was wild.
Yeah.
Al Green, 1975. To this
Yeah.
day, I say, I've never seen anything greater than that. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's amazing. He's still great, but
Yeah.
he's 80 and he's not what he was, but back in
Right.
the day, boy, oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to talk about Al Green, but before I lose the thought, I just want to say I couldn't imagine hearing Ella Fitzgerald sing at last live.
That's Etta James.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah. Ella was a jazz scat singer. Well,
Mm.
I mean a jazz singer, period, but she's scat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I messed that one up. We might have to edit that out, Tyler.
That's
But
Etta James would belt out at last. I
yeah,
saw
yeah, yeah,
her
yeah.
live. I'll tell you an Etta James story.
Sure.
I I got her to sign an album, and she looked at the album, and I could see something was wrong, and she goes, "They wouldn't put my picture on the album because
Mm,
the model was prettier than me."
right, she's a heavier woman. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So, you
she.
know, yeah. So,
I apologize to Ella Fitzgerald, but
yeah.
got an Etta James story out of it.
There you go.
Um, so you talked about in the book going to see Al Green at his church,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean, you described it as like a small church. None of the white people in town even knew where it was. Like, what was that experience like? Just describe that for the audience. It just sounds crazy.
1992, I go with some buddies, white guys, Jewish guys from New
Yeah,
York, and we
yeah.
go down south on vacation. And one of the stops was Memphis, and we went to the Mid South Coliseum. We saw Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett against the Moondogs, and they tore the place up. And from there, we went down to Al Green's church, and I'm sitting there, this little tiny church, and the whole time we were trying to find the place, no white people knew. It was still like segregated,
Yeah,
1992. And this was like a mile from Graceland.
right.
And so finally we find the church, and I'm sitting nice and close. Um, Al Green comes out. He must have seen like, the look of awe and wonder in my eyes because he's my favorite performer.
Yeah,
He made a beeline for me. shook my hand, then did then did 4.5 or so hours of like the greatest concert. It's not technically a concert, but it was all music.
Right.
And in the middle of it, a homeless guy walks in and he looked in bad shape, bad shape. And Al anoints him with the holy water, the whole deal,
Yeah.
and you know, saves the guy. And
Right.
and I'm Jewish. I don't know from any of this, and I'm like drained, emotionally drained because you could feel it. You could feel it, and people are going wild. They're running laps around the church. There's a documentary, The Gospel According to Al Green. So if you want to
Oh,
actually
check
see
that out.
some of this, it's all in this. Not the day I was there, of course, but the documentary is about that particular church. Al Green was one of the biggest R&B stars, pop stars in the world in the 70s. He sold
Yeah.
100 million records.
Yeah.
And a girlfriend of his, a jealous girlfriend, scalded him with hot grits. And he had 3-degree burns all over his body. And then he was born again.
Yeah.
And he actually left R&B for gospel for the longest time. I would go see him do gospel shows at the Beacon Theater in New York, where he didn't sing one hit. And that was unbelievable.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Yeah,
saw
I
little I
remember.
saw Little Richard do a gospel show when he went through one of those phases. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Al Green performing as the Reverend Al Green
Yeah.
for a long time. I remember that. So we're coming up on the hour mark, and I wanted to ask you, out of all the stories in the book, out of all the people that you've met, out of everything that's in there, and there is a lot. Like, I can't wait to get to the end. But what's your favorite story that you put in there?
It's funny. I was thinking the same thing. There's 100 plus stories.
Yeah.
The next to last story in the book is called Sunny. Nothing to do with Sunny from wrestling. The
Okay.
song Sunny, Bobby Ebb, mid 60s. There was a song Sunny, and it was a huge, huge hit, and hundreds of covers. The greatest artists in history have covered this song. And every time it came on the radio, my mother would get like misty-eyed. And once or twice I could see like she's wiping. And so finally, I'm, 7, 8, 9 years old. Mom, what's this about? She said, I had a girlfriend named Sunny. She was an actress, and she was my best friend. And she would invite the starving actors over to her apartment, and Ben Gazzara and Peter Falk would come by, and John Cassavetes. And she said one day Brando, who actually was famous by that point, came by with them.
Wow.
And she said we would go to the gospel shows together at the Apollo, and we were the only white people there. Now you know where I got my ears from my mother, my father, and growing
Sure.
up in a black neighborhood.
Yeah.
So she said, every time I hear that song, it reminds me of my friend Sonny. And
Mm.
then I did a little research when I was writing the piece, and it turns out that Bobby Ebb, who died a few years ago, um, his he wrote that song days after John Kennedy was murdered, and his own brother was murdered in a bar fight.
Oh, wow.
Was stabbed to death. So I write at the end of the story, it's 2 minutes and 40 or so seconds of this beautiful, optimistic, you know, time I hear it, I get emotional because I feel what my mother felt, and
Yeah.
and she's gone now, and it
Right.
kind of connects us between time and space. And for whatever reason, I just get very choked up every time I read that story. And you can read this whole book, and the 100 stories are not really related, but that story, because she's gone and we're still connected, and the very last story where I dream about the people in the book,
Yeah.
we're still connected. And you know, when you have great people in your life, physically they're gone, but you know, the legacy that they left, some of my friends were very, very famous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nikolai Volkov, Johnny Valiant, Lanny Poffo, et cetera, so on. And Killer Kowalski, they're all in the book.
Yeah.
And when you create art, whether it's music, film, theater, wrestling, and wrestling, when done well, is an art like anything else,
Absolutely.
you're going to live forever. And in in the movie The Wrestler, Aronofsky spontaneously threw me in, and I acted in The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. And ironically, we improv the scene. Aronofsky just says to me, Evan, walk up to Mickey last, ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid. So Mickey whispers in my ear, just improv it. Like I'm an actor. I've never acted in my life, not even in high school. So
Right.
so I walk up to Mickey last and I ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid. And I'm thinking, what am I going to say? I loved you as a kid. I saw you at Madison Square Garden. Can I have your autograph? So he looks at me and he's improving and goes, what's your name? So I'm
Yeah.
thinking for a second. I just instinctively go, Evan.
Right.
How surreal this is. I'm playing myself in a fictional movie and it made the cut. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's there for eternity. It's even in
Yeah.
the trailer, almost 5 million views. So 100 years from now, 100 years from now, when we're all gone, Mickey, me, you, everybody, we're all gone. Somebody's going to watch that movie, and Mickey's going to say to his daughter, Randy the Ram's going to say to his daughter, I'm just a broken down piece of meat. And
Yeah.
people are going to cry 100 years from now.
Yeah.
It's a when you create art, it's a little piece of immortality, and that means more to me than any financial compensation. None of us got rich from it. It was an indie film. Even
Right.
Mickey didn't get rich from it. Mickey's real payoff, by the way, he was hot from The Wrestler. He got $1 million playing the heel in one of the Iron Man sequels.
Yeah.
That
He
was
did.
the real
Yeah.
payoff for The Wrestler
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
none of us made big bucks off of that. It is an indie film, but
Right.
I'm blessed to have been in it. I'm blessed to have worked with these people, known these people. I mean, they're not all gone, and
Yeah.
it's been an interesting life, and I've juggled the teaching, the wrestling, the film, and basically that's what I want to do until I can't do it any longer. I always want to keep writing books and making movies and teaching, and it's all honorable. It's
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it seems it seems almost secondary now to ask you this stuff, but I mean before we go, where can people find the book?
You could get it on Amazon. That's the
Yeah.
easiest. Just go right on Amazon. Wrestling rings, blackboards, and movie sets. We got a 4.9 out of 5 rating as far as the reviews, and
Awesome. Awesome.
people are moved by it, and I'm moved that they're moved.
Yeah.
It's the reaction you want. And again, this is an indie book. None of us will get rich from it. But it's cathartic. It was very cathartic. It was like burying ghosts, and not to make it sound all grim. There's a lot of funny stuff in there.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a 30-second story.
Go
It's
for it.
9/11, 2003.
Yeah. Yeah.
2003, 2 years to the date. I'm on a little puddle jumper, 20-seater going from Philly to New York with Johnny Valiant.
Okay.
We just did a convention, and the pilot looks like Lee Van Cleef. The pilot looks like every bad guy in a Chuck Norris terrorist movie. Okay? This
Yeah.
guy looked rough. This guy was not GQ. This guy looked like his nose was all over the place. This guy looked like a bad guy in a movie. And we're getting on this plane on 9/11. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So So Johnny looks at me and he whispers, "You see this guy?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And then we make the decision. Okay, we're going to go on the plane because we're exhausted. We're running all weekend.
Right.
And then, of course, because it's a little tiny plane, it's hitting all kinds of turbulence. And I'm like, "Johnny, are you going to have to like pile drive this guy? Are we
Right.
going down?"
Yeah,
Obviously, that
you
didn't
survived. Yeah.
happen, but some of the stories, they're funny too. I don't want to pummel people with, but you lose a lot of good people along the way. The older you get, and you're a
And
music guy.
so many people
Just this
passed. Yeah.
year, we lost Roberta Flack and Chris Jasper from the Isley
Yep.
Brothers, and
Angie
oh my,
Stone.
Angie Stone. I saw Angie Stone live. She was old school, belt them
Man,
out.
so yeah.
Yeah,
Black Diamond is such an incredible album.
yeah.
Man, yeah.
And
Uh
so it's you
David
lose.
Johansen on the rock side. I mean, New York.
I saw David Johansen open for Blondie back in the day in the 80s, at an arena, the Meadowlands
Yeah.
Arena. And you know who the other act was? Totally unknown, Duran Duran.
Oh wow.
That was a triple
Man,
bill. And David
man.
Johansen had billing over Duran Duran. He was hot at the time.
Well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
Blondie was the headliner. But David Johansen was a great live performer.
Oh,
Great.
sure. Yeah, he would embody the character. He was a rock star.
Buster Poindexter.
Western Poindexter, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
obviously in the New York Dolls. The funniest thing, I had John Easdale on my show pretty recently, and he was talking about how, the New York Dolls would wear lipstick and leather and everything. And he was like, but they were tough guys. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, if you went up to David Johansen and like, talk some smack, he could beat you in a fist fight. It was just like, it's so funny.
A lot of these guys came out of the Lower East Side, and I had a girlfriend down at 186 Avenue A. The further
Yeah.
down you got, B, C, D, it got rougher.
Okay.
It was rough in the 80s.
Yeah.
So my girlfriend, she didn't even have a bed. She had a mattress on the floor, and we'd fight off the cockroach a lot. But what was interesting is you had a lot of great artists collaborating, and it was
Yeah.
every genre and every combination back then. And but Miguel Pinheiro, the famous writer, he did Short Eyes. Oh my God, he
Yeah.
was down. He was like a legend in that neighborhood. And yeah, David Johansen and those guys, man, they were visionaries,
Yeah.
visionaries. And
Absolutely.
he'll never get the due that he should get.
I know. Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, the New York Dolls. It's I don't know. I remember picking up their first album at a garage sale in the '80s. So it was obviously after their heyday, but I was into some of the hard rock stuff, and I was like, these guys look like the bands that I listened to. But then I took it home, and it was so much tougher. Like it was so man, yeah. The New York Dolls were special.
They were
You know,
great. Bands like Defunct,
yeah, yeah,
Joseph Bowie, Lester Bowie's brother,
yeah.
great band. James White and the Blacks, you knew them?
No, I don't know those guys. No,
James White was a white saxophone player who played this honking sax, but it was like punk. It wasn't quite jazz. It was like punk.
right,
And
right.
with like a lot of attitude, man. James White and the Blacks,
Yeah,
Defunct. There was some great acts back in the day, and it all came together, and a lot of them didn't make the money they should have. Even
right.
Fishbone never made it to where they should have.
Yeah. There's this band from Chicago called Slamming Watusi, and they were out in the early 80s, and they sounded like the New York Dolls, but with a saxophone player.
Oh yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean, a saxophone player who was like honking,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
like odd. He didn't play like, Curtis Stigers or that's the first guy I could think of. But
You go back far enough to like Big J McNeely and Joe Houston, the honking jazz
no,
saxophone players,
no,
R&B saxophone.
no, no.
I saw Big J McNeely at Tramps,
Oh,
and he literally took the saxophone out into the street, into a different venue, and all the audience followed him like the Pied Piper out into the street, into
wild.
another venue, back out into the street, back into Tramps. Then he would play lying on his back. Look up videos of Big J McNeely and
I
Joey
will.
Houston. These are these
Awesome.
great honking, really R&B saxophone players. But again, it's a combination of everything. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. At first I didn't get jazz. I
Me
tried
too,
listening to
until I
John
was older.
Coltrane and Miles Davis and stuff like that, and it didn't connect with me. And then I heard Billie Holiday,
Yeah.
and I mean, I was like, wow, so jazz can be really musical, you know? And I went backwards from Billie Holiday, and that was probably in the early '90s when I first discovered her.
Yeah.
Um,
Check out
yeah,
the avant-garde guys, Sun Ra, Art
sure.
Ensemble
Yeah,
of
I love Sun Ra.
Chicago. Yeah,
Yeah,
those guys, they could play anything, anything.
and I actually learned to appreciate like all the notes. I think that was the thing. At first, it was so busy for me; it was hard for me to keep up. But like eventually, I got it. And now, I mean, jazz is definitely as much a part of my life as rock and roll is. At this point. So
The
yeah,
other side is great, great artists, regardless of genre. It's not just the notes, it's the spaces,
yeah,
it's the pauses,
yes, yes,
Um,
and
check
that's what I
out
had to learn to appreciate. Yeah,
check out Cecil Taylor, Don Pullen, these
yep,
avant-garde jazz pianists, boy.
yeah,
Sometimes it's the pauses also. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, for sure. But yeah, there's so much. My brain is feeling overwhelmed now. But
Yes.
I'm glad that we got to come on here and talk about music. I mean, because music is a big part of your book. Some people might just know that you're a wrestling guy and think they're gonna get a bunch of wrestling stories, but there's music stuff in there.
You don't even
There's
have to be a wrestling fan. I mean,
absolutely
even the
not.
wrestling stories are about them as people. It has
Yes,
nothing
yes,
to do with the matches or the
yep,
titles. It's not what
yep,
I was trying to do. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what I was gonna say too. Like you said that the stories aren't necessarily connected, but I think that what connects the stories is you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your emotion and your perspective. And I was actually picking up on that as I was reading it. Your perspective is different than anybody else's, obviously, and you're not just writing stories just like this is what happened. You're giving how they made you feel and how the things affected your family and your friends and how it's a really, and at the heart of it, I think that so far anyway, the book is about relationships more than anything, so
The
I'm really digging it so far. Yeah.
I'm married. I never had kids, and my friends are dear to me.
Yeah.
And not everybody. You hear the sirens. This is New
Oh,
York, the
yeah,
tough
of
streets of New
course.
York. Yeah, I'm joking. I don't want to. I don't want to perpetuate that
Of course.
stereotype.
Yeah.
But
We hear plenty of sirens in southern Indiana too, man. So, yeah.
yeah. But a lot of people they'll say things like, "My family means everything to
Of
me." Well, what about your friends? What about your
course.
community? What about your
Yeah.
neighbors? What about your coworkers? And with some people, empty nest syndrome is going to kick them hard because you can't just ignore your friends. Friends,
Right.
I had a friend pop up at my house the other day, 12:30 in the morning. He was having trouble with his wife. He needed somebody to talk to. You
Right.
have to be there for your friends. It's not
Yeah,
just
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Last night we had a pretty bad snowstorm here in town. Well, it wasn't a bad snowstorm, but it was very windy, and the snow was coming down like little daggers. And I walk. I mean, I've never driven. It's just not in my DNA. I just have never driven. So moving down to southern Indiana, it was a different experience because everyone drives. People are like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Man, there's buses where I'm from until 4 in the morning. Like, I don't need to drive."
I don't
But
like driving. My father was a
yeah,
taxi driver. I never liked driving. I haven't had a
yeah,
car in 20 years.
right, yeah. But the gist of the story is, I was at work and I worked a short shift last night, so I had to leave at midnight, and it was really rough outside. And a buddy of mine just randomly messaged me to ask how I was doing, and I was like, well, I'm bundling up to get ready to walk home, and he came and picked me up. And that's to me, that's friendship. Like, I didn't ask him. Like we were just talking and he knew, he came and got me. We had a good conversation on the ride and then we had another good conversation before I went inside, and it made what would have been like a, oh, this sucks, a terrible walk home,
Yeah.
a cool little experience. So
You
yeah,
one way or the other, you learn who your friends are and you learn who they aren't. What it is, and surround yourself with mutually supportive people who love and respect you and follow your muse and help people. Life is complicated, but it's not.
right,
It's friends,
sure,
family, being creative, helping folk, having some degree of spirituality, which doesn't have to be religion, some
right,
peace of mind, some, you know, um, life is challenging, and you know,
yeah, yeah.
have the
So
right people, have the right people backing you. It'll make it easier.
yeah, so Evan, I think I said this the last time you were on too, but I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours. But yeah, but it was great having you back on. Anytime you've got something coming out, I will definitely extend the invitation. Or anytime you just want to come back on and talk. I mean, you have a million
I
stories.
appreciate it. I wasn't lying before. I enjoyed this because, telling the same wrestling stories all the time,
Right.
I
Sure.
mean, I think it's see, one of the things I wrote in the book is,
Yeah.
even in the dedication, I said to my parents, thank you for the good ears,
Right.
because
Yeah. Yeah.
um, bestowing music, turning people on to good music, I think it's important. And,
Yeah.
you know,
And
some of the people we mentioned, the average person would not
this
know.
one, no, sure.
Somebody watching this will check it out and their mind will be blown.
Right. Right. I mean, and I'm a wrestling guy. Like I was a wrestling promoter. I wrestled a little bit. I have a wrestling podcast, but I've also been in bands and I love music, and I loved music before wrestling. So, and I noticed the music in your book, and I mean, it's not that I didn't want to talk about wrestling, but definitely like family and music was the thing that stuck out to me the most. So I wanted to, and family, whether it's chosen family or your personal family, like I thought that those were important things to talk about today. So I'm glad we did.
I appreciate it. I
Yeah,
appreciate the support.
absolutely.
I enjoyed
Great.
this. And anytime, seriously, I'm not just saying it, anytime.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to thank Evan Ginzburg so much for coming on. I've enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank Tyler Martin and Emmy Studios for producing this thing and getting it out into the world. Check out Evan's stuff on Facebook. And the website is Wrestling Then and Now. Is that the website? Or Wrestling
Oh, you
Memories?
can go to evanginsburg.com,
Okay,
prowrestlingstories.com. I'm the
there we go. Pro
CEO.
Wrestling Stories. Yeah.
Um, we did 350 Days, the documentary, Wrestling Then and Now, another documentary. Um, next Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be interviewing Tommy Rich live on
I
the Evan
saw that.
Ginsberg's Old School Wrestling Memories page. That'll be fun. I'm looking forward to that because he's a good talker. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that'll definitely be a good time. So yeah, thank you everyone for checking us out. Check out the Roundtable Wrestling podcast as well. We have a Patreon, which Tyler will be putting up on the screen. I am producing a movie that was based on my original concept, and you want to talk about low budget. So please, there's a Kickstarter for it. It's called Swipe Right. Or not Kickstarter, I'm sorry, Indiegogo. The movie's called Swipe Right, and we'll get a link up for that too. Please support me if you can. I really appreciate it. Evan supported me, so thank you so much, my friend.
You supported me, man.
Always.
And if I could help in any way with the movie itself, I'm happy to. I've worked on a bunch of films.
Yeah, I appreciate it. All right, so yeah, everybody, thank you so much. Have a great week, and please come back next week when we will be interviewing Mark Knight, the former guitarist for Bang Tango. So come back for more Most Excellent Entertainment.